It's my birthday weekend and I was really looking forward to this movie, since last year's Wicked was a massive box office success. M Chu was able to bridge both the theater crowd with the film crowd, which, to be frank, is quite the audacious task. Both mediums have their advantages, and it always seems like there's this tension between the two sides, like both sides can't play nice. Obviously, most of that coming from having solidarity with their preferred medium, but M Chu was able to create something that was truly awesome. Chu's Wicked has that larger-than-life, whimsical, fairy tale cinematic feel, while also having those really intense, intimate moments that are so captivating in the theater. The flare of colors and animated landscape that make this world that he created feel so real, despite its Looney Tunes aesthetic. As you may or may not know, Wicked is the story about how Elphaba becomes the Wicked Witch, which is arguably one of the biggest, most known Broadway plays of all time. In typical Broadway fashion, this story is broken up with an intermission to signal the midway point, and M Chu really took that opportunity to explore and characterize this world and essentially milk two projects out of this thing. To put into perspective, the play from beginning to end is 2 hours and 45 minutes. That's including the 15-minute intermission. The first Wicked film alone is 2 hours and 40 minutes, and when including the sequel, that's basically 5 hours total runtime. Suffice to say, yeah, M Chu really wanted to expand on many different things in this story, and personally, despite some pacing issues, part 1 was overall really good. In the sequel, we follow Elphaba in full witch mode as she embarks on an arduous journey to prove that the wizard is a fraud and set free the animals of Oz, and in the midst of all this, a girl named Dorothy, along with her band of misfits, is set to dampen Elphaba's plans. It's actually kind of insane when you realize Elphaba was villainized and ostracized just because she spoke out against the mighty authority. God forbid somebody call her by her real name and not the Wicked Witch. All this just because she didn't want to play nice. That's diabolical, but I digress. One of the things that I really love about this film and part 1 is how it takes all these ubiquitous visuals and presents them in such a stylized way that still makes them stand out and feel unique and not just tacked on to induce nostalgia based off of the Wizard of Oz's memorabilia. And on the topic of memorabilia, I've really grown to love the theater and have a real appreciation for that medium. Wicked is the first play I ever saw, and for obvious reasons it's hard for other plays to live up to the magnificent scope of that story. And I understand why there's so many references in the modern zeitgeist of its iconic moments. Being a person that really loves movies, I was excited when the original Wicked was released, because I wanted to see this already rich and creative world through a cinematic lens, and yeah, it was epic. Ariana Grande was absolutely insane. I'm truthfully not a big fan of her music, but wow, was she meant for that role. She was able to give that character such a profound yet subtle level of maturity that you can't not love her by the end. And I mean, Cynthia Erivo was sensational, breathtaking performance, and she has my favorite scene of the entire movie with that solo dance that highlighted every pent-up emotion at that point. Wordless storytelling is like my secret kink in movies, and goddamn was that awesome. Her eyes spoke every word that you needed to hear in a scene without dialogue. That's powerful acting and impressive directing. Her eyes were expressive throughout the entire runtime, but that moment was truly special. So much about Wicked worked and soared past any worry that this movie wouldn't be a success. But we're pulling a Stephen King one with the conclusion to this duology. It really felt like this story was navigating so well until it realized it didn't know how to conclude, so it decided to speed through checkpoints, ticking off everything it thinks it needs in the hope that that's enough. This really is a case of it's not about the journey, it's about the conclusion. This movie, or second half of the story, is darker, less lighthearted, just like the latter half films of the Harry Potter franchise, which is what I'd expect. Obviously, it's no more fun and games, the stakes are higher, we understand the danger that looms over Oz and everyone individually, except it's not so dark when it should be somber and poignant. There's a pivotal moment where it's pulled straight from the play, so I get its faithful intention, but I hated seeing this moment on screen, just like I'm not a fan of it in the play. It's a moment that should be played straight since it's about grief and loss, and it gets treated like a skit. It's a joke where Glinda and Elphaba start slapping each other, and it's just so frustrating to watch. Part 1, I think, was able to resonate so much because of how stripped back and vulnerable it was willing to be during important moments. It dramatized moments that needed to feel heavy, especially because I think the reason why Glinda's acting this way in part 2 is one of my favorite elements. Even though she has less screen time and isn't as funny, she has more urgency at this point in the narrative, and it's kinda like her arc of self-discovery like part 1 was for Elphaba. Of course your moral compass is gonna be out the window if you ultimately can get that dream that you wanted so desperately since childhood, and you're a fool if you think otherwise. Sure, it's cruel, but it's unrealistically idealistic to assume she would sacrifice everything for one person. After all, it's societal pressure that sometimes forces people to do things they don't really want to do. There's definitely tones of political commentary, just like in part 1, that weave into Galinda's arc, and it doesn't make her a monster, it proves she's human. But that moment that's deeply impactful on both sides of the argument, since it affects both people, should have expressed devastation, not laughter. The other, way more astonishing issue with this movie is somehow the pacing of the movie. I cannot believe that a 5-hour total runtime, which is what these two movies are combined, can feel so rushed. Incorporating elements and characters of the Wizard of Oz story is cool and exciting, but because they are limited to how much importance they can have in this story despite having actually interesting arcs, it ends up feeling like they are more of a nuisance than anything else. Many of the characters actually had interesting developments and emotional weight in their own stories, but because they aren't central to this story, it comes off egregious and borderline unnecessary. Because they can't do that much with those characters outside of reminding you why we like them so much. There's shockingly not nearly enough runtime to flesh these characters out, and again, it's unbelievable that with this much runtime, this movie would have benefited from another 30 minutes. Outside of one character that becomes the voice for the people, which is great to see, there's an extreme sense of limitation on that end. I think the worst decision this movie made was not following part 1's thought process. Part 1 really tries to find a blend between film and theater, catering to both sides, while Wicked for Good tries to appeal more to the theater audience to really make them feel at home in those big moments, but at the cost of feeling awkward on the big screen. The conclusion to this movie was a real stinker. Let's be honest, it did not stick the landing. There just wasn't a thread clear enough to tie everything together in a coherent manner. And I don't mean tying into the Wizard of Oz story, since yes, that is propaganda and it's not the actual truth. I mean within its own narrative. There's ultimately just a very real argument that could be made that a story that's depicted in a play doesn't translate gracefully to film, and that's okay. But for me personally, I just didn't feel satisfied by the time the credits rolled. Also, the other weakest, less urgent problem of this movie is the title. The title is awful. Yeah, I know it's the name of the song, but no, it's awful and I can't let that go. Overall, I think this movie is serviceable, and if you don't care about connecting dots and just want good music and beautiful production, then there's still a lot of value on that end. But it didn't live up to the conclusion that I was expecting based off of how good part 1 was. But that's it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.